Добрий день, я вітаю всіх, хто приєднався до нас.
Good morning. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Ola Atmanova, and it's my pleasure to welcome you at the Ukraine Media Center today. Today we have invited you for the presentation of an analytical report called Technologies of Terror, Comparative Analysis of Soviet and Russian Torture Methods. The topic is really important and sensitive for all of our society, not only ours. The Media Initiative for Human Rights has analyzed 40 evidences of the Ukrainian prisoners of war who were set free. Their evidences about the tortures during their imprisonment during the years 23 and 24. So the Russians' practices were compared to the practices of the Soviet Union. And today we will have the presentation of results, and we will be able to track the coincidences and what our analysts were able to study. So let me introduce our speakers. Joining us in the studio today are Maria Klymyk, the documentary filmmaker at the Media Initiative for Human Rights. Also joining us is Ivan Dibrov, former prisoner of war, 1st Marine Battalion. Also joining us is Vladyslav Havrylov, analyst of the Media Initiative for Human Rights, and Rassamakhina, head of the War and Justice Department at Media Initiative for Human Rights. Thank you for joining us. So, Ms. Maria, the floor is yours. Let's start with methodology of this analytical survey. What was studied? Whom have you been able to survey? Whom have you been able to talk to? Good morning, everybody. It's our pleasure to welcome you here today during this conversation on this very important topic. So, Media Initiative for Human Rights, with the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we've started collecting evidences about what's going on with our prisoners of war in Russian captivity. During that period, we were able to talk to about 130 prisoners of war, and comparing their evidences, we were able to see that in Russian Federation there is a system of treatment to those whom they hold in captivity. In our analytics, we've used evidences of 40 witnesses, but actually the survey is based on all of the evidences that we were able to collect within these 3 years. In our analytics, we were focusing on evidences provided by the military prisoners of war. We didn't actually cover the civilians, but it's worth emphasizing that the same practices are used by Russia against the civilian prisoners whom they held in captivity. And unfortunately, it just happens so that the military who are being set free are the only witnesses of what's going on with the civilians in Russian Federation, because the civilians are not so frequently exchanged during the prisoner of war exchanges. And currently we have information about the civilians, the captive civilians in the territory of Russian Federation only based on the evidences of the military who were set free, who were exchanged. And all those practices of tortures, both physical and moral, are being applied to all categories of citizens, of Ukrainian citizens staying in Russian captivity. For Russian Federation, it doesn't actually matter what's your age, gender, the physical condition of the prisoners of war. It's not important for them whether you're civilian or military, whether you're a man or woman. They apply those practices to everybody. Also, they are being tracked in every place of captivity in both temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine and the territory of Russian Federation. So basically, as we were analyzing the evidences for our analytical report, we've tracked certain stages of the methods of influence over the prisoners of war. There is a number of such stages. Some of them are, so to say, mandatory in every place of captivity. The acceptance stage, one of the most cruel methods used by Russian Federation. It's the process when a person is being transported to the new place of captivity, and those people are being treated very cruelly by the guard the special forces who accompany them, and the process may take from several minutes up to several hours. And during that stage, different methods are used against the prisoners of war, including electrifying sticks, just beating, punching, and kicking. And people may undergo that process a couple of times during the period of captivity. People may change from 6 to 12 places of captivity, and in every such place they undergo this, so to say, procedure. Also, there are such methods as daily checks, laundry, walking outside, which is always accompanied with beating, sometimes the use of dogs who sometimes bite the prisoners. And after that, the prisoners of war are not being provided proper medical aid, and sometimes even the medics may apply physical violence against those asking for medical aid, which also negatively reflects on the physical condition, on the health condition of the prisoners of war, because many of them end up in captivity after severe wounds, like having shrapnel in their body. But the provision of medical aid, restriction of meals, prohibition to sit on a bench or on a bed, some of the prisoners of war may have been standing on their feet like 16 hours in a row during the day, during all of the period of their captivity, which actually affects their health because they're being beaten on their legs with the clubs, with the tasers, and the medics fail to provide the medical aid, which results in the tissues starting to rot. The people have horrible condition of their limbs, and it results in very bad morale because all those tortures are being repeated. According to the evidences that we got from the people whom we were able to talk to, for 2 years of their captivity, there were no single day they wouldn't have been beaten. And it keeps repeating on and on. As soon as you leave your cell, there is a 100% guarantee you are going to be beaten, not for doing something wrong, not for being too bold or hell of an enemy to them, but just because they can. And if during some moments that physical violence is used to find out some information, to seek recognition of participation in crime, or they seek information about location of foreign instructors. But in the majority of cases, the guard only does that because they can. We had evidences when, for example, in the correction colony number 1 of the town of Donske, the guards were saying that they only beat the prisoners of war because they can, because that place of captivity was not known. People were not being let out of that place, and the guards were using that fact. They were saying, like, we can do anything we want to you because we know that we're not gonna be punished for that. We're just gonna get away with it. But as soon as our guys and girls are getting back from the captivity, they tell us about what was going on to them. And it gives us understanding that the Russian Federation on a systemic basis keeps violating all of the international norms, using electrification, using beating, define any standards of humanity, define the provision of medical aid, hygienic products, anything. And they do it consciously. So in our analytics, we were trying to demonstrate all of the stages of the Russian captivity our prisoners of war are being moved through, for the world to understand that Russian captivity is one of the most horrible things a human being may experience in their life. That's why we try to draw everyone's attention to this fact, so that in international arena everybody understands that the things Russia is saying in the media is completely different compared to what's going on in reality. And our military are civilian prisoners who come back from captivity. They are ready to tell about their experience, so it doesn't repeat and it just stops. Thank you. Thank you. Ivan, a question to you. First of all, thank you for visiting us, and obviously I would like to ask you about your experience. You were a former prisoner of war. Can you please share a little bit of your story? Good morning, everybody. I can keep talking about captivity for hours because, as Maria has mentioned, there's a number of stages. I ended up in captivity during the defense of Mariupol on the 13th of April 2022. So first I got to Olenivka, Donetsk region. We were met by the acceptance team. We were unloaded from the bus. I just walked out. And they started asking me my personal details, who I am, where I'm coming from. And as soon as I've started talking, they started beating me on the head, on the hands, on the legs. They started telling me I'm a fascist. Then they told me to face right. I turned right. I've seen two ranks of Russian troops, and they told me, like, run. I started running. They had rubber clubs in their hands and the belts with metal buckles. So I was running through those two files, and as soon as you run to the end of that file, they just kick you on the chest, you fall on your back, and they all start beating you. It lasts like 10 minutes. You're being beaten everywhere, on your hands, on your legs, on your head, and then they make you squat, and you're squatting within 2 hours, and they keep walking around you and beating you with the rubber clubs. So I was witnessing a man die from Battalion 501. He was just beaten to death. Then they put us in a barrack, and as I was walking upstairs, there were more Russian military with the rubber clubs who were continuing to beat us. Then I walked upstairs to the second floor. They told us to undress. We've undressed. Then there was another beating. They checked the presence of any personal belongings. And then they left us in those barracks, which were empty. There were no bunks, no beds, nothing. We were just sitting on the floor, lying on the floor, talking about food. There was minimal ration. We were eating we had 3 meals a day, but it was like 100 grams of bread and 50 grams of tea without sugar. Well, it was of little help back then. Well, the conditions were terrible during the interrogation. Again, there was beating. I was brought to Donetsk for interrogation. I was being interrogated for 3 hours. And during those 3 hours, there were special forces behind my back. And as soon as they disliked my answers, they were beating me. Then they brought me to Olenivka. I spent 3 more days there with no water. We were brought water from the river because they were saying there is no water for you guys. Then they brought me to Sukhodolsk. I spent 5 more days over there. The conditions were a bit better there until Russians have come and started interrogating. So during those interrogations, there was some Russian military. He was like an Asian, like a Mongolian. And during an interrogation, he pulled a knife, an American Glock knife. He put it to my ear and said, if you're telling me something wrong, I'm cutting your ear off. So after the interrogation on the 27th of April, they took us and they started transporting us to Russia. They tied our hands with the zip ties. Then they put a scotch tape on our heads and they put us in the truck. They said we are being carried for an exchange, but as they started beating us, we've realized that it was no exchange. We've heard that we were brought to an airfield. There were dogs barking. Then they started using tasers. They bent us and started bringing us to the airplanes. So the dogs were barking. They were biting the guys. Then we were beaten. We were electrified on the way. Then they put us on the airplane. And as we already started feeling that we were about to land, one of the Russian military said, like, "Welcome to hell." Those were his words. I remember then. Then they put us on the trucks. And only then I found out it was Vyazma, Smolensk region of Russia. And as they started unloading us, I've heard the dogs barking, the screams of the people. As soon as we were unloaded, we were electrified, beaten again, with dogs biting. Then they brought us to a cellar. They forced us to kneel down on a concrete floor. So they put us on our knees and on our elbows. And we were forced to stay like this for 12 hours, and they were forcing us to sing the anthem of Russia. It was played on, and it was continuing like every 10 minutes. And if you refuse to sing, the cell door opens and you're beaten. So there were about 20, 30 people in a cell. And they were pulling us one by one, and we were hearing their screams as they were beaten. And those zip ties, they were sharp. They cut my hands, and I asked one of the Russian military, like, "Can you ease them? I'm bleeding." And they said, "Yeah, right." So they pulled me out of the cell, and they bring me somewhere on the way. I'm being beaten. And then they threw me on the floor, and they told me, "Wait for your turn." And I could hear people screaming, and I was realizing something's about to happen now. So they picked me up, they pulled that scotch tape off my eyes, and I see two big Russian military right in front of me. And only then I realized they were representatives of the prison administration. And the first question was like, "Do you have any tattoos?" And I said, like, "Yeah." And I haven't even shown them. They say, "Come on, you have 5 seconds to undress, or otherwise you're gonna suffer." I started undressing. I took all of my clothes off. They told me to put my hands on the wall, and they started beating me with the club on my back. The first strike was real hard. I screamed, and they said, "Another time you scream, it's gonna get even worse." So they were beating me on my hands, on my legs, on my back. Like the club was about 50 centimeters long. And then they told me to turn around. They've seen the tattoo of the wings on my chest. They told me I'm a fascist, I'm a Nazi. They beat me on a foot with a club. I fell down, and then a Russian military stepped with his big foot on my face, and other military started electrifying me. They were beating me with a taser on all the parts of my body, including my genitalia. Then they were beating me with the clubs. I was losing my conscience like 3 or 4 times. Then they were pouring water on me and continuing to torture me. Then they put me on a chair to cut my hair. You know, it was not like cutting, but rather pulling my hair off. And then another military was continuing to beat me on the chest with a club. Then they put me in the shower. There was only cold water, but it felt real hot to me. Then another military came in, and as I was standing in the water, he started electrifying the water, and the electric currents started going through my feet and legs. Then after the shower, they gave me my clothing. They brought me to a desk, and I've seen a representative of administration at that desk, and then I realized, then I found out it was the head of the administration of this confinement cell. His last name was Zakharov, as I found out later. Then another representative of administration came, grabbed me by my neck, and started beating me, telling me, "How many have you killed? We know everything about you." And then they continued torturing me. Then there was a short interrogation. Then They wanted to fingerprint me, and then they forced me to kneel down, and they started taking my fingerprints, with that black thing. And then there is this metal roller that they with which they beat every single one of your fingers. But then I had a brother in arms who had a tattoo of Archangel Michael on his back. So his back was beaten until it was bleeding. Then I was brought to the medics. They've asked me about my health condition. I've said that everything is more or less all right. They said it's going to get worse. And then one of the special forces guys started beating me with a taser on the neck, on the genitalia, in the chest, in the stomach. And then they threw me in a cell, and they told me, you have a minute to learn the Russian anthem. And then every day at 8 o'clock in the morning, we were brought out for a check, and from day one, we were beaten at 8 o'clock in the morning every single day. It was going on a regular basis. Within 2 years, every single day. So have you been staying there for 2 years? I've been staying there for 33 months, but after a couple of our brothers and ours have died of that beating, the people for human rights started coming to that prison, and there were people with rotting legs, and Ukraine forwarded representatives to Russian Federation, or it was a request to check the conditions of containment in Vyazma. Well, after that visit, the things went better, but the tortures continued, both physical and moral. As Maria has said, we were standing for 16 hours in a row, singing Russian anthem on and on. We were studying the history of Russia, the days of military glory. We were singing songs. There was radio that was always saying that we are Nazis, we are fascists, that we eat children, we are Banderites, a lot of things that they were saying. So during that captivity, we had no rights, no freedom, no will, no liberty. We were drilled from day one. We were tried to be proved that we are nobody and our name is nothing. And it was continuing until the very last day, until we were exchanged. Ivan, thank you. After the things you're saying, it's difficult to even talk, let alone to imagine. Thank you for sharing, Vladyslav. I know that during the preparation of this report, you were analyzing the reports of the Soviet era. You were studying the criminal proceedings that were documented. So what have you been able to find out? Is it real that all those methods used by the Russians, that they originate from the Soviet Union, and it's just the continuation until this day?
Yes, the thing is that we do see by the tortures, by the horrors that were just told by Ivan, unfortunately, these methods, evil methods of torture used during the Soviet Union. What we see, first of all, is the signs of anti-humane treatment of the prisoners of war that start during the acceptance and then are applied during the whole stay in the captivity. They use dogs, they use batons, they use electrical shocks. This continues for hours and hours. Then they beat again, then they interrogate, then they use electrical shocks, then they use water torture. They there is a torture called topic, which is basically an old army telephone that's getting unwired, and the electrical wires are applied as electrical shocks. And this was used during the Soviet Union times too, and the tortures were applied in the same manner at the time. What has to be emphasized is that Russia just ignores the international humanitarian law. It lacks any kind of respect to the military personnel. They deny any kind of possibility to resist to the invasion of Russia. Even more, they apply Russian criminal code as a means to accuse prisoners of war. These same methods used during Soviet Union too. In the same manner, there was no grounds. There were no grounds for accusing people in this or that crime. However, the criminal code was used to keep people in captivity. And now what we see is the repetition of the same crimes from the side of Russia, the same crimes that were used during the Soviet Union. And we are basically concluding that this is just a modus operandi of the Russian Federation, which they apply to the prisoners of war. And it's not only the people who directly apply force to the prisoners of war, it's also the command, it's the whole chain of command of the Russian Federation army that is involved in these kinds of crimes. Recently, we heard that in the Russian Federation, it has been forbidden to make footage from the captivity places. And basically what we've seen is also like a deliberate framing of people into being accused of something that they were not guilty of, which led to their deaths, which led to their beatings, psychological torture. This same way during the Soviet Union, we've investigated, we've studied the archives of the special forces that come from the Soviet Union times, and that have evidence of people actually dying, losing their lives. These same things we are observing right now. Who directly is involved in this is basically the servicemen of the Russian special services, which is which is practically overseeing the penitentiary system of the Russian Federation, and that are directly involved in the torture practices. And we are concluding that this is a established policy of the Russian Federation, and accordingly, it has to be punished in accordance with the international law.
Thank you, Vladyslav. Ms. Anna, so can you please give us a legal evaluation of those terrible crimes going on in our territory? Well, all those crimes Despite being that horrible, they should be translated into a legal language. They should be put in the map on the system of coordinates in the international legislation. So even though all those guilty cannot be held accountable, which may be resulting from a number of reasons that we all understand, still all those crimes have to be documented and the memory about them should be preserved. So getting back to what's going on in the Russian prisons, to the Ukrainian prisoners of war, to the civilians who are being held captive, we in MIHR, we keep proving that it's a crime against humanity. It's a systemic, wild-scale attack on the civil population, and that attack is united by the same state policy. And it's worth mentioning that on a global scale, there were no cases of holding perpetrators accountable for the crimes against humanity. Such cases were in Yugoslavia and other countries, but it's considered that it's only about the civilian prisoners. However, in MIHR, our opinion is that civilian is any person who is being protected by Geneva Convention, and in this sense, the military who are staying in Russian captivity can be considered civilians because they have no arms, they don't take part in hostilities, and they are under full power of those colonies and other law enforcement agencies. So yes, it's a crime against humanity in our opinion, which is being characterized, as I've said, by the following features, such as broad scale, systemic nature, and single policy of the Russian Federation, of the state of Russian Federation, which is aimed at torturing those people, murdering them, and other types of inhumane behavior. Wild-scale nature is seen in the total number of the prisoners of war who are being subject to torturing. In simple words, it's all of the prisoners of war, as it was mentioned by the report of the United Nations dated in 2023. 90% of all of the Ukrainian prisoners of war who were staying in captivity in Russian Federation are being subject to this or those types of torturing. In my opinion, that number is a little bit too modest, because we were not able to find a single military who wouldn't have been subject to torturing, and it's happening, as it was said today, in all of the places of captivity where Ukrainian prisoners of war are held. We know about no exceptions. There are more and less cruel places, but never ever in any confinement site, it's a place where people are staying in the conditions that comply with the requirements of Geneva Conventions. Also, in the sense of Geneva Conventions, the prisoners of war are not perpetrators. Yes, they have their freedom restricted, but they didn't do any crimes. That's why none of their activities may be considered illegal. So again, talking about the wide scale and the systemic nature of this is proved by the practices. All of the evidences of the witnesses, they tell us about the acceptance phase, types of torturing. They are the same in the colonies that are located 1,000 kilometers one from another, standing on their feet for hours, singing the Russian anthem, and so on and so forth. We can count those methods on and on, but they are being repeated in different regions, in different colonies, with different directors. Also, it's worth mentioning that according to the internal legislation of the Russian Federation, in the prisons, only those can stay who have some status in the criminal proceedings or are convicted. The prisoners of war, the citizens of other states, those against whom criminal cases were not initiated by definition cannot stay in the Russian prisons. And if the directors of those prisons comply with their own internal legislation, they wouldn't have had right to accept those prisoners of war as they are being brought. But as we see in none of the cases that we are aware of, the directors had no questions, which is another proof of systemic nature of that crime. The repetition of patterns, the patterns of behavior that are known to all of the perpetrators, and they cause no resistance. This is happening all around the Russian Federation. And as to the state policy, generally the state policy about the crimes of humanity can be confirmed by the orders, resolutions, instructions, or it can be seen in the behavior of all of the perpetrators. Vladyslav has already mentioned that, in fact, those crimes could not have been perpetrated without organization on the highest political level of Russian Federation. So centralized placing of prisoners of war in the prisons of Russian Federation couldn't happen without the orders of federal government. There should be an order issued on the top level. And the same applies to the involvement in the interrogations of different law enforcement agencies such as FSB, military police, and others. So if we assume that those crimes are a result of a concept of certain perpetrators on the bottom level, we can understand that it's sanctioned from the very top, and it proves that it's a crime against humanity and it's a government policy aimed at such perpetration. So this is the conclusion that we can draw, not only based on this crime, but also in other crimes that we study. And I want to thank you, and I would like to provide an opportunity to our journalists to ask the questions.
Hello, newspaper Fakti. I would like to ask Ivan. Tell us, please, what was the conditions in the cells? Did the guys support each other? Did administration try to separate you? So was it possible to support each other? Did the faith in God help you, for example? What did help you to cope with all this psychological? During the war, I actually started believing in God, and when I was in captivity, it actually really helped me. And in the captivity, we tried to support each other. However, the conditions were very violent. Like it was constant hunger. They made us learn their literature. They did torture us, and if one of us didn't know something, everybody was punished. And they actually did do try to separate us, to make us angry at each other. The same with the food, and they did deliberately make the portions of the food different for different people. And all this, it actually does affect the psychological condition. Also, the acceptance phase. The administration makes everything to make the conditions in a particular cell they were trying to make enemies with each other from the prisoners, and also they came up with with more and more different methods of torture. There was a variety, you know. So, like, first it was food, then it was different conversations with prisoners of war, individually or with everybody together. Also, they made us read their literature without eating anything and standing the whole night and reading. They did shifts, so-called shifts, when prisoners of war were changing. The ones that were standing and reading, they changed. And then they made us confess to different crimes that we did not do. However, they needed to provide some kind of confessions from us, and they made us do it via using physical torture. Like the main torture did happen in the morning. Like for example, they were taking the prisoners of war out of their cells, crouching, and they used beatings. They beat us with feet. They beat us with batons. They beat us. They beat different parts of our bodies. Our hematomas started rotting because of poor blood circulation, and you hear the guys screaming every morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you start to fear for the lives of the guys, for your life. And then you come out of your cell and you see somebody getting beaten, somebody getting beaten by dogs. Basically, what they did, they trained their dogs using our guys. And after that, they made us learn or study Russian history. Like nothing, there is not a single document that says that we need to learn or study Russian history, but they made us do it. They told us, you're sleeping like every day and night, so you better learn, you better study Russian history. If you don't do it, we will beat you, and you will be just lying on the floor in the cell, and nobody will help you. Psychological torture was also applied. One of my friends was taken to interrogation, and I heard they turn on a very loud hardcore music, but we heard screams still. And also, my friend was seated in a chair. They took a rubber hose. They attached a heavy hardware to this hose, and they beaten us, and he lost consciousness, and they cut one of his testicles. So we were basically just animals that had to follow their orders. However, with time, with time, as they started to get to know us, the tortures kind of started a little bit lax. However, they still continued beating every day. So among themselves, like their interpersonal culture was something along the lines: Did you beat Hohol today? No, no, I didn't. Why you should go and beat him? And they used special hard gloves to beat us, to beat our kidneys. And after that, guys basically were urinating with blood, you know, and you are called all kinds of names, Hohol, Nazi, and not just because we're like really bad guys or enemies, just because we were Ukrainians, you know. Even for me, for example, I was a Russian-speaking individual. My Russian language was my native language. However, Ukrainian language and God basically helped me to cope with it until I was released. In 2003, in March, was the first letter that we received from the outside. It was a really short. It was a really short message, and it said, "Hang on, guys," but you cannot imagine how important it was. So, after that letter started coming more often, and it helped our morale stay high. It basically meant that we are not forgotten, that our country still remembers us. It helped immensely. Meanwhile, everything we heard every day was the anthem of the Russian Federation. We were kept being called Banderites, Nazi. They basically used their own propaganda to tell us what our crimes were, which we did not commit, but they used those stories basically to make us confess that we are Nazis. However, how were we Nazis? We were only trying to defend our country. That's it. And this discord, the disparity between the reality and what they were trying to make us think, had a very deep psychological impact on us, because the reality stays the reality. Like we were not the ones who invaded them. They were the ones who invaded us. All this lack of food, absence of medical treatment, basic human treatment, lack of basic human treatment. Like they only talked to us with threats. Well, I mean, there were people in the Russian Federation who were more or less adequate. Like, for example, one of the security guards, he said, "I don't want to treat these people so inhumanely." We never heard from him since. So there are people among them, but they're very, very little. And maybe any more questions?
Well, if I may ask, can you tell us a little bit more about the meals like bread, tea, maybe some chowder? Well, on the very first day, we were given like one spoonful of potato puree and 100 grams of tea. That was our first dinner in the prison. Then you wake up in the morning and they bring you like a chowder, like cereal peel, and it's just boiled, and they give you like a metal cup, 100 grams of tea, and such a small square of bread, and it's like not soft. It's like a raw dough, and you cannot even digest it. Well, and then you get the first course, but it's actually just a red color chowder. And as a second course, you get that cereal peel. So I spent a couple of years on such a diet. So I've lost 35 kilograms. Then the ration started improving. The people just started falling, losing their conscience. They couldn't just physically carry on, and they've improved the ration. They added like 20 grams of bread. There was a real cereal, not the cereal peel. It was not just a water. It was like a real, like a porridge, you know, because people really started falling sick, and they were just forced to feed us with something better. And every month something was getting better, something was getting worse. Like they were saying, like, the exchange is coming soon, we have to improve their condition. And when another information was coming, they cut all of the ration for us. We were just eating water, and that's it. There was such a, so to say, swing, so the food was never sufficient. Well, there are more questions on the floor. Can you please tell us, when you were exchanged, before that, did you know that you were about to be exchanged, and what have you been feeling as you've come back to your homeland? Well, the exchanges were traditionally going on after the New Year. So we were sitting in a cell, and we were thinking that probably, we were fantasizing who could go. Like, we've already spent some time in here. So I was sick with tuberculosis, but now I'm well treated. I got proper treatment, and in front of us there was another cell number 16, and the door of their cell was opening, and they were saying, like, out with your belongings, Andrei. And we were thinking, like, cool, if somebody is taken out of that cell with their belongings, it means they're going for exchange. And then the cell number 12 opened the door, and we were sitting there in cell number 12, and I'm telling my brother in arms, like, Dmitro, you're going home, tell all my relatives that I'm alive. And then the door opens, and they say Batuk, Dibrova, and they call the names of 5 of our guys, and we were like real surprised, and they were like, what you waiting for? Come on. Well, using obviously threats and obscene lexics. So they brought us to shower, and they gave us prison robes, but the new ones this time. So they brought us to a cell. We've realized that we were going to an exchange. We spent like 4 hours in the cell. We've asked the guys from our cell all of the information, whom should we convey what. So according to the procedure, we've sent the final Russian anthem against the camera. So they forced us to say for footage that we are not going to fight against Russian Federation anymore. Then they put us on a truck, and they brought us to an airfield. Then the truck door is opening, and we see a Bowen sitting there. So they force us to bend down, and they zip tie our hands, put the bags on our heads, and don't put us on the floor in the airplane, but they put us in the seats. It was about 2 hours flight, and then as soon as we've arrived, we've heard the voice like, guys, we're about to remove the zip ties, remove your masks. If you act good, in 2 hours, you're going to be at home. So our eyes were open. I counted our guys. It was 25 of us, all of them severely sick. It was on the 25th of January. We were put in the ambulance. We were carried through Gomel to the border with Chernihiv. Then the ambulance door was opened, and they tell us, walk your way towards yours. And then we've crossed the border, and we've seen the tears of joy, the tears of happiness. We were put on another ambulance, and we were brought to Chernihiv. There was a lot of tears, a lot of emotions. They gave us phones so we could call our families. So it was joy and happiness and a lot of tears. We have more questions on the...
Have international organizations... Я чекаю. Добре. Have international organizations reached out to you to hear what you've been through? Because Ukrainians hear in Ukrainian news or some small news outlets, but do international organizations like Red Cross, anyone seeking justice, do they come talk to you? Дуже дякую.
Well, I'm working with Veteran Hub, which is based in Vinnytsia, and the journalists from Belgium were coming to Veteran Hub, and I gave an interview to a Belgian television. I've told about the treatment of the prisoners of war in Russian captivity. I've told about all of the stages of my captivity. I've told about the psychological and physical torture. Well, I've conveyed all of that information to the international media. Thank you. Thank you. And let's take another final question. I wanted to ask you if that information can be publicly disclosed when it comes to the recruiting. Have they been trying to recruit, or have they been realizing that it's just vain? You know, it started from the very first day, because in every cell, as the administration says, every cell should have its ears, as they call it. Like, I was a reconnaissance, and they were saying, like, you're a recon guy, you know how to do that. So you're gonna return your guys, and then you're gonna make it good. And I was like, yeah, fine, all right. And right away, I walked into the camera, and I said, guys, they are forcing me to return you, so you're not telling me anything. I'm not telling them anything. You know, I gave a word to myself that I'm not walking on the heads of my brothers in arms, and I can say it even now. So the recruiting was continuing on and on. Once in 3 months, the administration was coming to us, offering the better conditions, offering to switch sides. In Russia, there were battalions of the switchers. They were called the Bogdan Khmelnytsky Battalion, and they were trying to recruit us on and on for better food, for better conditions. And then FSB was coming. For 8 times I was interrogated by FSB, and they were suggesting me to cooperate so I could get in touch with my families and thus help Russia. And they said, your family has enough sorrow, and I said, yeah, they have enough sorrow. I'm in captivity. I don't want any more sorrow for them. So after that, I refused. I was beaten, and then FSB was coming on a regular basis, offering me to cooperate, but I did not. So kind of like this. And if I may add just one small thing. You know, this Bogdan Khmelnytsky battalion that was established. Obviously, there were Ukrainian defectors, but their share was infinitesimal. You know, I'm treating this thing quite seriously. You know, us Ukrainians, we are friendly. When it was difficult, we were supporting each other. But there are morally weak people. They are being broken. They are being broken physically and psychologically. And to survive all those difficulties, people need a real strong will, because for any small defection, you are being just beaten to the floor. You know, for me being a reconnaissance personnel, you know, they were beating my lips to blood. I was just crouching back into my cell. The guys, they were dressing me because I couldn't dress myself. And it's difficult when they tell you, like, work with us. And they don't just offer you. They keep beating you for 3 or 4 weeks, and they like ask you, okay, so what? And you're totally physically exhausted, and it's very difficult to refuse, you know? I'm saying this. You know, people are such kind of animals that they break. You know, I don't judge those people. They've just picked a better life for themselves out of what could be offered. Obviously, it is supposed to be punished because we are supposed to love our people, love our land, to die for our homeland and for our brothers in arms. But as long as your country is somewhere far away, and the guys, they were sitting in a confinement cell for days, and it's difficult to preserve your will and strength over there. It's kind of like this. Well, thank you. Seems like it resulted to be quite a difficult conversation, however, still very important. So I would like to thank all of you. Ivan, first of all, thank you for finding strength to share your story, and I want to thank everybody who works on documentation of all those crimes, and everybody who keeps working to make sure that the justice is still in this world. And I want to thank our security and defense forces, thanks to whom we can gather and discuss such matters. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes.